Hey, very stoked to have you guys here tonight as we are going to debate, is moral realism true? And we're starting right now. So glad to have you here, everybody. This is going to be a special debate. So we have two awesome guests here tonight. We have Christopher. Thank you so much for coming on to debate on whether or not moral realism is true. This is going to be a short and sweet one. And Christopher, I love getting your opinion. You're a well-read guy, and you're a very sharp thinker. In a lot of ways, I'd say you're a prodigy. So we're very honored to get to have you back on. And then we have our guest moderator, the man, the myth, the legend, Nephilim Free is here. He's right down here. See there? That is his avatar right here. Charlie didn't know. So, want to say thank you very much for Nephilim Free also stepping in last minute to be able to help us out. So, both of our guests' links are in the description. And since Nephilim Free is going to be our moderator, I'll be debating with Christopher. So we agree on a lot, but I think there's one thing we may not agree on, and we'll see what we get to for that. And if this is your first time here, I want to encourage you, hit that subscribe button. We have plenty of other debates on religion and atheism coming up. And as of now, I will turn over. The floor is yours, Nephilim Free. And
Okay.
Thank you for being here to moderate.
Hey, thanks for letting me help you out tonight. Before we start, I think it's important to point out what moral realism is. There might be people listening that don't really know what it is. In short and sweet, moral realism is it's the philosophical idea that objective moral values and duties exist and are real, regardless of our opinions about them. For example, I'll give one example. A moral realist would say that what Hitler did was evil, whether you agree with that or not. It was objectively evil. And if someone disagrees that it's evil, they're simply wrong because it is evil. And that moral truth exists. And so that's what moral realism is. It would be, you might say that moral realism is countered by the idea of moral relativism. So I just wanted to point that out. There might be people who don't really not real familiar with that term. And so they should know, okay, so you guys are going to go back and forth for about 45 minutes or so. And we can just go ahead and begin. And after that, I'm going to be taking questions from audience members and posing those questions to our two debaters. So we'll start out with having a coin flip. Okay, I'm going to flip a coin in my mind, and somebody's going to pick heads or tails. Okay, bing, I know what it is. All right. Chris, heads or tails?
Heads.
You win. You go first.
Well, so I'm going to keep mine pretty short and sweet for my intro. I ascribe to what's called moral error theory. I believe that all claims of a moral truth are inherently false due to a fault in logic or fault in epistemology. And so I am of the opinion that there is no such thing as a moral truth. I don't think that there is any objective morality or any objective moral ideals. Now, there's a caveat to this, and that it's not that I don't think that there aren't normative ethics. Normative ethics being that despite the fact that objective morality doesn't exist as an ontological thing or a metaphysical entity of its own right, that we can still have a normative system of ethics wherein people will come together, come to an agreement, and that will form a basis for a societal form of morality. But yeah, that's my position, simply put. I just don't think that objective morality exists, or that you can really say anything about it, even if it did.
Excellent.
Okay, it might be interesting to if I could, maybe for you to tell us why you think that's true, and then for James to tell us why he thinks objective moral values and duties do exist, that moral relativism is true. Maybe we could start out with a premise. That would be good. And what you've stated so far is that you don't think that moral realism is true, but could you give us a reason why you think it's not true, and then maybe James could counter with his reason for thinking that it is true, and I think we could use that as a springboard to go forward.
So there's multiple reasons for it. The first one is that is the problem of discerning what is and is not objective, even within a reality basis. For example, saying trying to say that reality itself is objective philosophically can get problematic in its own right. To then move to to try and say that that morality exists and is a metaphysical entity in its own right is, in my opinion, impossible to do, because I don't know how anyone can, if there is objective morality, define what the objective morals are. B, I don't think the problem I have is that if there is objective morality, I don't know how one can distinguish it from all the other moralities that there are out there in the world. And then three, there's some. I also just simply go to Occam's razor. Don't multiply objects beyond necessity. I don't see any necessity for objective morals to exist in the first place.
I think that I agree so much with Christopher that if I were not a moral realist, I would be a moral error theorist, and there are a couple of reasons why. So even if you were a naturalist, or I should say if you believe in moral realism in the natural sense rather than the non-natural form, so you think that there's nothing extra in terms of like metaphysically, you do still have, I think, at least one good argument from J.L. Mackie, who was the original moral error theorist, that I find persuasive, at least if I were an atheist. So J.L. Mackie pointed out, if there is no God, he still thinks that even if there were a God, he thinks that there would be potential problems. So I don't want to make it seem as if the theist has like a free lunch here, but J.L. Mackie did have a good jab when he said, if there's no God, it's really, and this is called the argument from queerness in his book, is he argued that it's really strange. By queerness, he just means like it's bizarre that you would have moral laws that were just out there on a non-theist universe. So an atheistic universe, one in which there's no lawgiver, like the idea that the universe just exists, whether it be eternal or just popped into existence and had these moral laws, seems bizarre. And I think there is something to that. So he gave another argument that I'm not as persuaded by, J.L. Mackie gave, but that kind of gives you like where I could say like, I kind of see where Chris is coming from. And even as a Christian, I'll share that really quick. The moral argument, I used to be like all for it, for God's existence. And then I started to get a little bit reluctant. And I was like, well, okay, I feel like I've got other reasons, other arguments you could say. So I was like, I'm okay giving up this one if I don't have as much confidence in it. It's not like I stopped being a theist. But one concern I had with the moral argument is that when we ask ourselves, like, what reason, so theoretically, what if we were living in a universe that didn't actually have any morality, like there's no objective moral truths out there? How would we know one way or the other, right? Because Nephilim, thanks for defining that, by the way, because I usually jump into the debate without defining anything. So I'm glad that we got that. Like, and Christopher, I think Christopher, you and I are probably in agreement with what Nephilim gave at the beginning in terms of, moral realism, like objective moral facts that exist independently of us. One thing that I would bring up to you, though, Christopher, that I can't take credit for this idea. It's actually from Inspiring Philosophy, and it's one reason why I started to actually think, wait a minute, okay, maybe I shouldn't give up my belief in objective morality based on my personal experience. Because for a while, I was like, and forgive me, I know this is long-winded, but I'll put the ball back in your court in a second. I was like, I had heard these like evolutionary debunking arguments, and then just the challenge, like the more foundational challenge of how would I know if I lived in a universe that has objective moral values versus not? And it really boils down to my personal experience. Like, it seems to me there's this deeper moral feeling that I have, this experience I have with regard to certain things I observe in the world, right? But then I was kind of like, well, but what if it is just a feeling that's not correct? Like, how do I know I can trust this feeling, right? I mean, like, hopefully everybody asks that. Like, I don't usually like to just go on personal experience. My guess is you'd have that same kind of skepticism toward personal experience, right, Chris?
For me, it's not actually that simple. It's that as a subscriber to evolutionary theory, I think that there's an evolutionary reason why we develop moral outlooks. Particularly, like if you look at chimpanzees have complex social and moral structures within their communities. I think that it's similar with what happened to us. Is that in order to survive in our communities, we had to develop a code and system to live by, and otherwise it would be complete chaos. There'd be no social order at all. Which also explains why the social order is radically different between different groups. For example, so the morality in China is very different from the morality here, or the morality between Iran and Russia is very different as well. Um, and even the morality between two different individuals, like if we tried taking the abortion issue or something like that. When it the thing is that for me is that it comes down to is that it's not that it's real is not my problem is not with this with the personal experience as much as it's going to be that I think it's a social development, not a not something that is inherently existent beforehand.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think a lot of skeptics like don't realize like the power of Sharon Street's arguments of, hey, like these evolutionary debunking arguments might be a good reason to doubt morality, and that seems like that's not quite like you're not saying the exact same thing as her, but nonetheless, it makes you wonder because it does make sense that believing in morality could be really adaptive, right? That seems like it'd be true, and so it might you might think, oh, well, is it that we're actually perceiving something out there, or is it that we just evolved to perceive something out there because the ones who perceive something out there without even being right were just more likely to pass on their genes, and that's why we all happen to have this personal experience of morality. So my issue though, so I mean, we don't agree on everything. I don't agree on different countries having different ethics, but so we don't go down a rabbit hole. Like I'll defer. I'm gonna like let's like sidestep that. Though I think it's you probably read something different that I haven't gotten to read, and let's stick to the main issue. If I'm trying to use the moral argument against you, and I say, Christopher, I think moral realism's true though. I think there are these objective moral truths in the world, and you're like, well, James, what reason do we have to believe that? My thinking is, I used to say, yeah, personal experience doesn't seem very helpful, but then inspiring philosophy shared a really good idea. If I start having skepticism about my personal experience of the world, why don't I have, so you might say, so I might say, why should I trust my cognitive faculties for other things? And I think you've got a good answer for most things. What would your answer be if I were to ask? So go ahead.
Basically the idea I guess I'm gathering is that if we start questioning our intuitions about morality, we should question our intuitions about our other senses, right?
Some of our other cognitive things that our cognitive faculties are, we think,
right,
truth tracking.
Here's the thing is that I'm not actually against that. I am a lot more willing to be doubtful of my senses than a lot of other people when it comes to their philosophy. I am a person that does ascribe to Cartesian doubt. If I have reason to doubt something, I can treat it as false until I find reason to believe it true. So at that point, what we have to do then is try and find ways to justify our senses in that regard. And that's one reason that we have things like peer review. to try to have a cohesion of justifying our experiences. So if all of us get to the same conclusion by looking at a pool of evidence, we can say that that is most likely the case from what we can all experience. We can't say it's absolutely the case, hence science never does, but I do think it is completely valid to say if we challenge our intuitions about morality, it's completely fair to challenge our other senses in that regard. But I do think that when it comes down to it, that our other senses are more easily able to be measured than something as abstract as morality, because that becomes very subjective between people.
Yeah, so I mean, we're in agreement on a lot here. When, ooh, excuse me, when I was an undergrad or even a grad student in philosophy, I asked my professor sometimes, what about these like classic philosophical issues of like Cartesian, basically Descartes' demon, or so in other words, like how do I know that I'm not really just being tricked? And there's, or well, the Matrix is a little bit, I think, more easy for people to understand. So like how do I know that this isn't just a simulation, like some sort of computer simulation, and my experience, this isn't actually real? We're not really here. We're actually in the Matrix. Or maybe
Right.
I'm just a brain in a vat, and the scientist is like touching the brain in certain ways so that it has these experiences that I think I'm experiencing right now, right here with you. And I would ask my professors, and I feel like they would always be like, "Oh, there's an answer for that." Like, and I would be like, What is the answer?" And they would be like, well, someone solved it. It's been in a paper. I'd have to find the paper. I never felt like there's actually a good answer. Like, and the same
There
thing of,
isn't.
right, is that it's like, or even solipsism. Like, I'm not like a big on it, but I'm kind of like, there isn't like any sort of answer that like gets you clearly out of the woods. And same thing with
Right.
like moral experience. I'm kind of like, well, what reason do I have to believe in it? It's like, well, I believe in my moral experience, and we can talk about like peer review because I think that we actually do. So, for example, like we have, let's say, scientific papers or just our own kind of empirical observations of the world. We can say like, oh look, I empirically, I experience something, and I can go back and recheck it. Now, it's true. We could be like hyper skeptical, and we can say like, hey, but how do you know that when you check it the second time that your senses are reliable? Like, aren't you begging the question? Like, that's not where I want to go, though. I don't think we have to get that skeptical to see where we might be in trouble. If
No,
I'm,
yeah, I think that it is completely reasonable to have some base presuppositions, especially when it comes to reality. Like, I don't care. The problem with solipsism is that in the end, it's just a fun thought experiment, but it doesn't actually help us do anything. Sure, we don't know for sure, but the fact of the matter is that I seem to be experiencing a reality of some kind. It might be the Matrix, it might be whatever, but I'm still experiencing some kind of reality and interacting with it. I might as well have some assumptions about it to function in this what I'm experiencing. So I think it's completely fair to have some presuppositions about reality, that maybe that reality exists, that I can make some discernments about it. And my three are: it exists, other minds exist, and we can communicate and come to discernments about reality. Those
okay,
are my three base presuppositions.
okay, so why would you not allow a base presupposition such as morality? What would be the difference there?
Because unlike with the so with reality, my justification with reality is that even if I'm in the matrix, a fake reality is still a reality of some kind. No matter what, it is a reality that I am observing, even if it is an illusion. Um, but if it is an illusion, I'm still experiencing it in some way. Um, my justification for other minds is very similar to Berkeley's. That, for example, I seem to exhibit certain phenomena when things happen to me, like pain, joy, happiness, stuff like that. And I can see the outward effects that these other things that appear to be minds also experience these things as well. So there seems to be some intuitive value to assuming that other minds exist because there seem to be indicators that they do. And then the last one is simply it is that within this reality that I'm experiencing, I seem to be communicating with these other minds, like with you. So intuitively, it makes sense that we are able to communicate and can come to some kind of discussion, however, or discern things about reality. Now, the issue with morality then is going to come up. You and I would both agree that we think reality exists, I think, and that we are communicating with each other in some way, even if it's an illusionary reality. We're still communicating within the illusion, right?
I don't think there's a justification for believing in reality rather than that we're like some sort of simulation. But
Well, a simulation would still be a reality.
like, yeah, what I mean is like that we're actually here rather than a simulation, though. Like, but
Right.
I don't like push it because I think it's just like what's the point? But I take it for granted for you could say for pragmatic purposes.
Okay. I what I was getting at is that I think we both agree that even if we're in a simulation, we both agree we're in a simulation, or at least, or that there is something that we are a part of. It could be an illusion, a simulation. It could be an actual reality, but there seems to be something that we are experiencing.
Right.
And within that illusion, within the illusion or the actual reality, you and I seem to be communicating, even if it's fake, right?
Yes.
So even within the fake even within a fake basis of reality, we can still try to come to a discernment just within the confines of our fake reality.
Right.
Now, then the issue is trying to then assume the existence of morality within that. The problem with that is that can we come to the conclusion that morality exists? How can we do that? Like with this reality, you and I have managed to work through that. Even if it's within a fake reality, and this is a fake conversation, the conversation is still happening. It's just an illusion. How do we know if reality is a part of that, though?
Yeah.
Or I mean, morality.
Right. So, to be honest, it's not super clear to me yet how you're able to like. So this is independent of the issue was going to bring up. I was going to bring up something different, but it's still not clear to me like how we get this stuff for free, but morality would be different. I think I experience like physical objects, right? Like, and I think I experience like moralness, like some sort of moral essence. I don't fully understand yet how like, and forgive me, maybe it went over my head, but I don't fully understand like how we are not justified in taking our moral experience for granted then.
Because the problem with morality is that whether we feel it or not is in the end inconsequential to whether or not it's pre-existent. It's its own entity. Because even in an evolutionary basis where there is, or a basis where there is no morality that is inherent of its own right, we would still feel morals. So we have to try. So the problem is trying to discern whether or not the feelings we have are those of a actual morality or just feelings that we've developed on our own.
Okay.
With reality, it's somewhat different in that there is anything that you observe has to be a reality of some kind. Anything you experience has to be a reality of some kind. It can be an illusion, but it is still your reality. So that one comes because is automatically unambiguous. You have a reality, but now what constitutes that reality is not unambiguous. We have several theories about what that could be. Could be generated by your own mind, could be a simulation, could be an inherent reality in its own right, like a physical reality.
I think I ought to jump in for a second and say something.
Well, hold on.
It seems like
Neff,
you guys.
well, I was just about to bring up the argument, if that's okay, Neff. There's like a separate one like that I was going to bring up.
Well, I was just going to point out that you guys are veered off into the philosophy of mind and not moral, realism.
Well,
I just wanted to bring you back on track.
Well, we're getting there because we're trying to set up our bases for it.
We're basically it's definitely like been wide ranging, but the thing I'm getting at is if I can't trust my moral experience, how can I not? So why is it the case that I can say, well, this moral experience, I don't think I'm justified in believing in it. But then I'm like, well, what about my experience of like my actual rational cognitive thinking? So like, let's say like how I reason about probabilities. Because if I, let's say, were to say, well, even basic math concepts, an empiricist might say, well, you can see basic math concepts played out in the real world. So for example, like, you can't see like 2 plus 2 in the sense, 2 plus 2 equals 4. You can't see that in like the physical sense, or I should say, abstract. Yeah, the physical sense of like numbers. Like you don't see a number 2 that you can pick up and grab. What I'm saying instead is that, so the empiricist, I think I'd be like, okay, sure, the empiricist can say that we do see that like that mathematical equation in reality, in the sense that if I take 2 phones and I put them next to 2 other phones, they say there's 4. I'm like, okay, the empiricist, I can give them that. But with other more abstract math, like let's say probabilities, that's where I'm like, okay, I don't see how I can observe that in reality. Like that's not as easy to ground empirically. And so that would be an example of any sort of abstract thinking that we can't demonstrate like physically how we know it to be true, which I think there are examples. Those are the ones where I'm like, ooh, yeah, like, why am I, if I'm not privy to my moral experience of the world, like if I can't trust my cognitive faculties on that with regard to what seems to be true, why can I trust my cognitive faculties about these other things that I can't empirically verify and I have to just trust my faculties with? And the reason, so you could bite the bullet, and somebody might say, it stinks. We don't know if we're justified in our abstract reasoning. Like, and that's a really sad thing. Like, it's just the way the world is. And to say that, we should believe in morality otherwise is just some sort of appeal to fear. You're trying to make it seem as if like, oh, wouldn't it be a sad world where we couldn't justify our cognitions about abstract things? But it's not quite an appeal to fear. I'm thinking if we become this skeptical about our moral experience, it seems like we have to lose other things. And as a pragmatist, like a person trying to maximize my own utility, I think that those are things that we should hold on to. And so I'm kind of like, I don't want to give up all this. It doesn't seem like I should, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like the cost of, do you even think that that would be a necessary cost? Like if we're consistent?
So the one thing is that I'm not really trying to argue that we should be doubting our senses per se. Like there is definitely a level of scrutiny that we rightfully have over our senses. But even when it comes to morality, I'm not precisely saying that we should doubt our sense of morality. What I'm saying is that we can't tell the difference between if our morality evolved or if it's an objective existence in its own right. We aren't able to tell the difference. It doesn't mean that now, that doesn't mean that we should, doubt our feelings of empathy and stuff like that. I mean, that's how society stays together. But it does mean that it makes it exceedingly difficult to say on a philosophical level, does morality exist in its own right? Because I don't see any way to be able to differentiate between what could have evolved and what would be completely separate from an empiricist point of view. and then if we took it to a Cartesian point of view, I mean, there's really no reason to, there's no way to justify any of our most abstract presuppositions. As you said, I am perfectly willing to bite the bullet on it. Those are just presuppositions that we just have to have in order to function. There is no way to justify them. If there was, we could, throw out solipsism finally.
So I understand like your concern. So I mean, I think you're saying I don't know if you'd quite be a moral error theorist then. Like if you're not denying like moral claim, like if I remember right, a moral error theorist would say like moral claims are just all wrong. Like we're in error.
Well, I am going to say that they're all wrong because because the problem is that if you can't differentiate between them, you cannot say that they're right. So I am going to say that they're wrong, and until you can tell me give me a way to differentiate between the morality we could be experiencing as evolved creatures, or an objective morality, and because I see absolutely no way to be able to tell the difference. So I think that all moral claims to an objective morality are going to be automatically false.
But wouldn't they just be like we would just not know? So we should just be moral skeptics, I think then. And I mean, like, it's not like I'm winning. It's not like if you concede this point, it's not like I'm showing that moral realism is true. Like, I think that if we are like, well, we don't know if they're, it's kind of like we don't know if there are like aliens in our solar system. Like maybe somewhere in our solar system there's like life, like maybe unintelligent, but like maybe life somewhere in our solar system besides Earth. And we're like, well, maybe, but we don't know for sure. But we wouldn't like, I don't think we'd conclude like, therefore there is none. I think it would be more like, well, we don't know. Like, which is like skepticism, but it's not denying it, right?
Right. There is a slight a difference in the allegory is the issue, is because with evolution, it is legitimately plausible that that aliens could exist somewhere, because that's just how chemical reactions in evolution can happen. Could abiogenesis, if we manage to prove that is a thing, could easily give us all the credence in the world for thinking that other creatures have evolved on other planets. The difference between that and morality is that we have no way of even plausibly showing that an objective morality exists. I don't see any basis for thinking it, is the issue.
Well, how about this? I'll use like Platonism. Like, I don't know that there aren't abstract objects like numbers. So like I'm like, well, maybe there are. I'm not sure. I'm not like a nominalist. I don't have any like positions, but I'm neither am I a Platonist. I'm like, well, I'm agnostic. So I wouldn't go so far as to say like they aren't real. But like that's something too that like pretty much in the like some more similar in that we don't have like empirical evidence. Like you kind of give an empirical argument for like from evolution. Like I don't, I mean, or maybe, I mean, would you default to nominalism just because we like theoretically, let's say we're like, well, we don't know if there are abstract objects like numbers. Like I would kind of be agnostic on it. Like I don't see why we'd have a reason to say that they're just not real. I'd just be, you could say, a Platonic skeptic.
Well, I think I have every reason in the world to think that the concept of numbers themselves, the abstract concept, were invented by minds as well. Because, for example, if every single person became unable to comprehend a number, they couldn't count, would the concept of like 2 + 2 = 4, would that still exist without a mind keeping it in existence?
So I think that it sounds like you're giving an argument to lean toward nominalism. Like, and that's like okay, but I'm saying like, if there were no reason to go one way or the other, to lean one way or the other, like the default seems to me that we would be agnostic. And I'm thinking that's like, to be consistent, we should also be agnostic about like moral realism if there are no arguments that lean one way or the other.
Well, I would say the problem I have with going agnostic on these on these abstract issues in particular is because one of the things with uh, going to a point of non-decision is that you can't find a logical argument in either direction, right? Or a basis in either direction. My
Um,
problem is that I can completely find a basis for morality not existing, and morality evolved. Hence why elephants have their own form, chimpanzees have their own form, particularly just with mammals, actually. It's not really a thing that we observe with fish.
okay, but I think we're accidentally conflating moral experience with an explanation for why creatures behave in a way that we would say is moral or immoral. I think that, um, so like, do you understand what I'm saying? I think we accidentally confuse those a little bit. Because,
I'm not sure if we did if I did or not, because what I'm saying is that moral experience can be completely explained by evolution, and that we can observe moral experience happening in the social structures of other animals, which seems to lend credence to the idea that morality did evolve.
so, but I mean, how do you know, like, the moral experience of a fish versus mammals? That's why I was thinking you were going into the explanation of the behaviors rather than the cognitive experience of there being this, like, evil in the world or good in the world. Like, that's why I was like, we don't really have that much access to, like, the cognitive faculties of, like, how evil a fish experiences the world as, right? Like, that's why I was thinking we were drifting.
Right, but the thing with with morality is the way is that it's not just, oh, I think this is evil or I think this is wrong. Morality also functions on a social level, wherein violation of the social the status quo is a violation of the group ethic. We see that that's what happens in our own society. That's why we don't like it when people do things like shoplift. You aren't supposed to do that. That violates the status quo. Never mind the fact that there are tribes in the Amazon that have no concept of ownership and therefore no concept of theft.
Okay, but I think that
It,
you're.
it, I think that the thing is that morality and social systems are a completely conflated with each other in their own right. They're completely intermixed, and we just don't see that social system really in fish nearly as much as we do in mammals. But anyway, that's completely sidetracking. The, but the, what I was getting at is that we can observe more moral ethic and ethical behaviors and statutes being set up in social groups in other mammals besides us, particularly with a lot of our relatives in the mammal groups.
I think, but that would remember like that's. I agree that there's like interaction between like moral experience and like moral behaviors. Like, or for example, like my moral experience of certain things as being like evil can lead me to say like, okay, I don't want to do those things, so it affects my behavior. And I'm not saying that morality is like exclusively moral experience. Like I understand there are like different things under the broad umbrella of morality. Like there's like you could say explanations of our moral experience of the world. Namely, by experience, I mean like I get this feeling when I see somebody get murdered on the news. I'm like that's wrong. There's something deeper to that. It's not just an organism ending the life of another organism. It's got this additional like truth to it with regards to like it being evil or morally bad. Like that's my moral experience, and then there's like my moral like explanations of our moral behavior. Because like you could have theoretically you can have animals that do behaviors that we think of as like moral, but or immoral, but they don't have an understanding of like the moral concepts. Like so, for example, like a 2-year-old could come into the room right now and tear up like my books, but we wouldn't say that like they're morally culpable. They don't understand the ideas behind like that they're tearing up someone else's book or something like. So like the point is just that there's like moral you could explanations of behaviors we would call moral or immoral from an outsider perspective, right? Like we would say, like, if a 2-year-old did that, we would say like, well, we might think of that as immoral, but when we consider like the fact that the kid doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying they're like that morality is just about moral experience. So, and I understand that they interact and they like, but I'm saying like they are distinct concepts. You'd agree with that, right?
Right, but here's where you actually kind of helped my position a little, though, is when gave the example of the children and they don't really have that understanding of moral behavior, right? Is if morality is innate, is innate and is objective, then why wouldn't they?
Right. So you could just it could be the same reason that maybe people don't perceive like the physical world. Like sometimes they might have like some cognitive deficit or something. Like so let's say like so the same way that some people can't comprehend calculus, like they just don't have the cognitive faculties to grasp it. Or they might not even like see the world. But like so they don't see the sun, like they don't have an experience of the sun, but it doesn't undermine the fact that like a heck of a lot of us have this experience of the sun. We think it's real. Like, so it's like you could have some people with objective morality still being objective, even though some people don't like have a grasp of it. Like they don't have an experience of it themselves. So like,
But the thing with children is that you have to teach them you is that well first they learn moral values by observing us, and then we also teach them, and it's practically universal to my knowledge and from the psychological studies I've read, is that children are learn and are taught moral values because of usually based on the society they grow up in. So I the issue there is not that it's just some that don't have this innate, it's that really all of them have to be taught this. It's not innate really in children at all. Any social concepts in general just are not precisely taught to children. There are some that are definitely instinctual. Humans have a lot of instinctual social cues and stuff like that. But when it comes to like how you function and act in society, which is and how you are going and what morals you are going to live by in this society, that is completely taught.
well, let's examine like a couple of things here. One is, so it seemed at first it was like, well, hey, like some kids don't experience objective morality, like they don't seem to comprehend it. They might be like oblivious to it for like cognitive faculties being like not working in that child. And then it was like, well, maybe it's just that they don't like perceive it. They don't have the same cognitive faculties as us. And then you seem to like go to a new idea, which is basically a new objection would be like, well, but everybody has to learn it. But I don't think that even if it's the case that people have to like learn it, like how to recognize it, like I think there are truths about the world that could be objectively true, like that you have to be taught. You might not like they might not be intuitive to you, like you might not recognize it at first, but like let's say for example, like playing on your side, you might say like, well, people have to, people are taught evolution. They don't like recognize it at first. It's maybe not the intuitive thing. The intuitive thing seems to be like in Born Believers, like what's his name, Justin Barrett is a psychologist who's saying like the intuitive thing is people believe that like things were designed, but then we teach them that like, oh no, they evolve. Now I'm playing your role, like so like we just because we teach somebody something doesn't mean it's not an objective fact that we're teaching, right? Same with morality.
Yeah, I do agree with you there. I concede that point. But the issue though is still that if morality is objective, even if it's being taught and everything, what about it is objective? How do we determine what part of morality is objective? Because I'm pretty sure I could find the variances in just about everything.
Yeah, I think that people do disagree in the same way though that like there's you could say like I think there's agreement on the fundamentals. Like I do think it's cross-cultural, and maybe you could, well, so let's say it wasn't. Let's say like there was like just people disagreed even across cultures. Like let's say for the sake of argument I grant that. And this is actually J.L. Mackie used the argument for moral disagreement. This is the one I mentioned before that I didn't find persuasive. The reason is, I think it could be that something's like still objectively true even though people disagree. Like, for example, like humans disagree about God. Like, some people think he doesn't exist. Some people think there's like trillions of gods. Some people think there's like one, and then some think it's triune, and some are Unitarian. Like, there's all sorts of views on, God existing or not existing, but like there's still an objective fact about it, even if humans are like not great at truth tracking those facts.
Yeah, I agree, but the problem is discerning what the truth is. And then there's also the logic behind it. I mean, do have to keep in mind that behind all of this, we still, unless we want to do away with Occam's razor completely, we do still have that in the background. And the problem I see is that if we apply Occam's razor with the knowledge of evolution, I mean, I don't see any reason to assume that there is an objective morality, because it can be completely explained without the extra assumption. Morality can be completely explained without it.
I'm going to give you the last word because we have to go to Q&A because we're doing a short and sweet deal tonight. Though okay. I definitely appreciate you sharing all of your ideas tonight. This has been a good time. And so, Nephilim, if you've got some sweet questions from the audience, Chris and I are stoked to try our best to tackle them.
Okay, so let's get some. Nobody has been asking any. They've been debating with each other back and forth.
That's good.
So let's have some questions. If anybody has a question for one of our two in the discussion panel here, then let's have it.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, these guys have been going back and forth amongst themselves, but not asking any questions for you guys. So if anybody has a question, let's put it forth, and I'll ask it to them. And then and I'll put it forth to them. So.
And you could always go ahead, anybody that types in a question, if you put at moderndaydebate, or I should say, you'd have to put at Nephilim Free in order for Nephilim Free to see it as highlighted. And then Nephilim Free will see it and he can ask it. And in the meantime, though, like Chris, if you want to cross-examine me, like while Nephilim Free is collecting questions from the audience, like I'd be willing to take questions from you. I enjoy this.
Sure. So, I mean, the obvious and big one is going for me is going to be, how do you differentiate between how can you differentiate between a morality that has evolved and a morality that is objective?
Yeah, I think actually, like I said, evolutionary debunking arguments from like Sharon Street are, I think it's like, oh yeah, it's like a pretty good argument. I don't think it's like fully sound, or I mean, I guess it's sound or it's not. I don't think it's sound, but I do think it's like pretty powerful. I think that there is no actual like reason other than, so for a person it might be like implied for their worldview. Now, I wasn't going to get into this tonight because it's not pertinent. It's not like really central to what we're talking about. If I said, let's say I have like, theoretically, you would probably grant that like, if I did have strong evidence for Christianity, like, I say, hey, I got this like really strong evidence for Christianity, and Christianity like in the scriptures depicts morality as being like the laws of God, then I might say like, oh, like if I have strong reason to believe in Christianity, then I would think that there's like these laws of God, which you usually think of as morality. But let's say that let's say I didn't have that. Now, because obviously you don't think I have good arguments for Christianity, and that's okay. That's for another night. But
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So Klaus asks, modern day debate, do all need morals? I think it would be good if both of you would address it very briefly, if you like. But this is posed to modern day debate. Do all need morals? I guess what he's asking, or she is asking, Klaus is asking, does everyone need morals?
Yeah, I think that if they mean like, do they need morals? I guess it would depend on like what they're trying to get, or like what their goal is. But I think that people could probably like succeed in a worldly sense pretty well by sometimes cheating, as long as they don't get caught. So they have to be good at it. I'm sure there are people out there that have gotten away with some bad stuff. Like that, I mean, for example, like when we think of like some of these like corporate leaders, and some of them, if you think of like Enron or something, where the little guys like left out to dry. There seem to be like clear cases where there were people that did immoral things that got away with it. So on a purely like survival perspective, generally, but not always.
Okay, so
Christopher, I'm curious what Christopher.
yeah, sure. Let's have Christopher chime in if you like.
So I hate to be the Bill Clinton, but it depends on what you mean by need. Do they like inherently need morality? No. But do they need it for specific purposes? I would say yes. Like if you want, do you need a sort of ethical ground in order to work in a business with other people? Yeah. Do you need one? Do you need a different kind to work in a church versus work at, say, like a gay bar? Probably. But the reality is that those ethical grounds are going to differentiate between what social environment and so back to what I started with. It does depend on what you mean by need.
Makes sense. What was a next question now?
Okay, the next question, I hope I pronounced the name right. Addy or Addy, I think probably Addy, I'm not sure, says for both. What do you think we can conclude about morality? I'm not sure that I understand what that question is actually positing here. Maybe Addy, could you clarify? Or do you mean can we conclude that perhaps God exists or does not exist from morality? The morality gives us reason to believe in God or does not give us reason to believe in God? Addy, could you qualify? Let's see if Addy will respond real quick in the chat. I'm not going to give it long. Play a little girl from Ipanema. All right, not getting a response. All right, next we'll go to the next question. All right, the next question is from Iron Charioteer. This question was posed to James. If morality is objectively dictated by God, can God change? I'll ask the question again. If morality is objective, dictated, they left out and. If morality is objective and dictated by God, can God change?
Well, the Christian God can not change. It says God is changeless. I'm wondering if they're trying to get at like why. The question is not super clear to me on like how those two are related, unless maybe they're alluding to the idea that like why is it that God had different laws in the Old Testament compared to the New Testament? So, for example, like corporal punishment in the Old Testament for a lot of different crimes or things that the Old Testament people would think was sin, versus like why in the New Testament you weren't put to death for adultery. Like, is that maybe what they're getting at? It's hard to tell. I would say that it may be that God's like nature is consistent, like his moral nature is consistent, even though he has different commands for different people at different times. That like you could say, even like you may even say, I wouldn't be a consequentialist, but this would maybe make it clear for the audience of like if there is some like sort of consequentialist like greatest outcome that comes about of different like from having different laws at different times, you could see why having laws at different times could bring about like the greatest good at different times. And so like the morally good perfect agent would will different laws at different times, if that's what they're referring to. No, I'm not like.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. The scriptures say God says, "I change not." So God states in His Word He does not change. His moral views are always the same. I think the Christian response is that God can change how He deals with people, but that doesn't mean God Himself changes. So
If that
the
was
next,
if that was the way they were intending the question, yeah. So I don't want to assume too much about the question, but go ahead, Nephilim Free, with the next
yeah,
one.
okay. So Cameron asks, on what grounds do you condemn what you regard as immoral behavior if society accepts it? I think let's ask this question to both of you. I think that's a really good question. The question is from Cameron, on what grounds do you condemn what you regard as immoral behavior if society accepts it?
Well, for me, the way I condemn something is really just down to my own personal taste. It that is ultimately what it's down to. If society decided that it was completely acceptable to kill me, it would be completely acceptable for them to kill me. I might, but I'm probably going to condemn it because I don't want to die. But the reality is that the moral consensus would be against me.
Yeah. So for me, I appreciate that, Christopher. So I think I'm wondering if they're saying like, who am I to say? Maybe that's it. Is there maybe asking like, why should you, James, disagree if society is going a different direction? Is that like a Christopher? Do you think I'm interpreting it fairly? I'm not sure if I'm getting the question right.
Yeah, I think that is a fair interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
Of YouTube comments is
I
you know,
I think that yeah, I mean, I think this is actually like it gets at an important point for like moral objectivity versus subjectivity, which I
Yeah,
think Christopher would kind of agree with me that. So I mean, like if you assume morality is subjective, it's true. Like, why should I go around asserting that people can't beat their wives, right? I mean, like, that's one of the really unfortunate negative aspects of moral relativism is that it's like, well, who are you to force your subjective morality on other people? You might say for a functional purpose, so because societies that don't have spouse abuse probably do function better, they're happier. Uh, but that's not really a moral reason as much as a, like I said, a functional reason. If morality is subjective, how do we go around and like enforce other people to like follow our morality? I think if it's objective, we have more grounds for thinking we're justified in it. So because I'm an objectivist, I actually think that we do have grounds because I think those are objectively wrong. If I was a subjectivist, I couldn't even say. Not only do I think it would be kind of arbitrary for me to say like I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, well, if it's subjective, like they can't be wrong. It's already right by definition in their own mind. It's for them. But also, you can't even say that a culture could improve morally because to say that it improves means that it's moving towards some sort of objective standard of being better, right? Because
right.
if a society changes its morality, a relativist would have to say like on the ultimate level, it's just changing. It's not actually improving towards something by getting rid of slavery, let's say. If you say that it's like it's improving, like independent of whether or not people believe in it, by getting rid of slavery, like that's objective morality. So I think as a result of being an objectivist, I'm happy to force some moral rules on others, like don't murder people. Some others I don't like try to get the law to enforce. But go ahead,
Yeah,
Chris.
like I concur if you go on a purely relativistic basis. There is no pure basis for saying that something is right or wrong. I do think, though, that you can build a normative ethic basis, normative ethics being not whether or not reality is or morality is real or not, but has to do with how you function in society. I think you can build a normative ethic system based on uh, what you put functionality, based on like biology and stuff like that. We know that verbal abuse is psychologically and in a lot of cases also physically damaging. You know that killing people is physically damaging. So I think that you can build a normative ethic based off of functionality. I don't think you can build any basis for saying that something is objectively wrong or right, though.
I think we're in agreement on that. Is that
Okay,
it?
so next question.
Okay.
Next question is Stevie662 asks.
And this is the last one, by the way, because I want to respect Chris's time, because he's
okay.
trying to get on a good sleep schedule, and we promised short and sweet. So last one.
Okay. Well, I have several, but we'll go ahead and ask this one. If in the future, again, homosexuality is accepted by the majority, I guess they're referring to certain cultures in the past, such as the Spartans, which were very accepting of homosexuality. Would you agree? So, in the future, if homosexuality is accepted by the majority, would you agree? I guess that the question is, would you agree that homosexuality is not immoral if the majority in your culture deems it not to be immoral? That's what I believe the question is.
So my basis for what is or is not moral is not like I don't think I don't like saying things are moral or immoral. My normative ethic is based primarily on functionality itself, and functionally, when it comes to people's autonomy and their health, their happiness, I find no reason to condemn homosexuality. So, for me, the consensus doesn't have much to do with it as much as it has to do with the autonomy and functionality of the human being.
Yeah, I given that like both Chris and I have these moral views that are almost immune to, like, the question doesn't quite grasp onto our moral views, in the sense that, like, neither of us think that morality is determined by like a culture. So like for me, regardless of what direction it might go in terms of the culture's opinion on this issue or any other issue, I think Chris and I would both say like that's not where we would get truth from in terms of like going to the culture for the answer. We would both say like, well, Chris would be a moral error theorist. He would say all moral claims are in error to begin with. But I would say that it's objective, and so it's like a culture wouldn't define it. But given that that is the last question, I just want to say first thank you to everybody. I want to say that everybody's links, both Christopher's and our moderators, Nephilim Free, have their links down in the description. And so I highly encourage you, check out their stuff. Even if you don't agree, you at least get to know their view. You get to understand it straight from the horse's mouth. And so I totally encourage you to do that. And we also are excited. We have a debate tomorrow on intelligent design. It's our first one. And so we have Brooke McCormick versus a mystery guest. So I can tell you they're not far, though. It's going to be a lot of fun as we have that mystery surprise guest come on, and he's excited to come on. So we're very excited to have him. And but yeah, so again, thank you so much for our debaters, and thank you so much for the audience for your questions. And so we would just like to say, I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to hear your thoughts. Are you a believer in objective morality? We'd love to hear in the comments if you are, or if you are not, and why. So hope you have a great night, and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take